Today we're going to talk about RSA key extraction via low bandwidth acoustic cryptanalysis. This paper was published in 2013 by the authors Daniel Genkin, Ali Shamir, and Aaron Cromer. Notably, Ali Shamir is the S in RSA. I'm first going to introduce you to certain concepts that are core to understanding how this exploit works. So we're all familiar with the RSA crypto system. It's widely used for secure data transmission. This crypto system involves two keys: a public key, which is used for encryption, which is distributed to anyone and everyone. A private key, which is held in secret, is then used for decryption. RSA keys are generated by the combination of two secret prime numbers, and the security of this crypto system relies on the mathematical complexity of factoring a number into its two unique primes. An adversary who is able to gain access to the private key would be able to fully decrypt any and all encrypted messages and could assume the victim's identity. Diving deeper into the algorithm behind RSA, we could see two secret primes labeled P and Q. We multiply these primes to calculate n, which is used in modular division when encrypting and decrypting text. We then calculate phi of n, which corresponds to the size of the set of coprimes of n. Conveniently, this can be done by simply subtracting 1 from each of the primes and finding their product. We then select an encryption power e, such that it's relatively prime with phi of n. We can derive the decryption power d, such that its product with e when divided by phi of n results in a remainder of 1. Finally, we use e in conjunction with n for encryption and d along with n for decryption in accordance with the formulae presented in the slides. Typical RSA key sizes are 1024, 2048, or 4096 bits. It's crucial that P, Q, and phi of n are kept secret because they can all lead to the derivation of d. Side channel attacks are attacks that don't directly exploit a weakness in the entity, but rather exploit information leakage through peripheral channels. Common techniques used to perform side channel attacks on computer systems involve tracking power consumption, or even noticing optical, acoustic, and electromagnetic emanations. While we will be discussing side channels in relation to cryptography, it's important to note that these techniques can be used to make inferences in any setting. An interesting example of a side channel attack in an everyday setting is that the delivery people at various Domino's pizza outlets around Washington claim that they have learned to anticipate big news from the White House or the Pentagon. The side channel they exploit here is a measurement of takeout orders. Since there are individuals working overtime, that results in more takeout orders from these Domino's restaurants, as a result, giving them additional information about political activity in these institutions. The next topic I'd like to explain is acoustic cryptanalysis. Acoustic cryptanalysis refers to a side channel attack that uses audio cues to assimilate information about the working of a computer or a device. A crude example of this would be noting differences in the sounds of mobile phone or ATM keys and recording people using them to find passwords or private phone numbers. A significantly more sophisticated version of this is utilized for our purposes, which detects ultrasonic emanations from the motherboard of a victim's PC to obtain a private RSA key. So what computer sounds do we then care about? Noise generated by fans and storage devices of a computer like a hard disk are at best indicative of system activity and are unable to provide the granular information that's required to perform cryptanalysis. The vibration of electrical components, however, emit a noise known as coil whine, which can inform us about the type of operations being performed. These operations, however, are performed at a frequency that's too large to be discernible by traditional acoustic methods.
Before we get into discussing the methodology itself, let's touch upon what makes this exploit as dangerous as it is, and the most pertinent concern being that it is currently impossible to pragmatically defend against. Particularly for us as students, someone with a smartphone in their pocket might be able to sit next to you in the dock or on the adjacent table in the stacks and be able to access your RSA private key for your browsing session, which is, pretty scary. Moving on to our virtual demo, which largely uses slides borrowed from the original presentation as we are unable to replicate the setup ourselves. What you need first is a microphone, an amplifier, and a digitizer. And what happens is the target PC that is running the GNU implementation of the RSA algorithm, which we'll discuss in a second. The motherboard emits the sounds which are picked up by the microphone, go through the amplifier, and then the digitizer creates a spectrogram, which is something that looks like this. And so from the spectrogram, you can see this is when they knew what instructions were being carried out on the motherboard, on the CPU. And these are some common CPU level instructions: multiply, add, memory access, halt, etc. And so you can see that each of them has like a signature between them that you can sort of decipher what's going on where. So because of how quickly CPUs process instructions today, it's extremely unlikely that a single call to the RSA decryption protocol will suffice for you to be able to crack the key of a target laptop. Therefore, the methodology calls for a self-amplification attack, which is sort of a side channel attack, which leverages an algorithm against itself by forcing it to work multiple times over in repetition, making it easier to detect the audio cues that are being emitted from this instruction as compared to the billions of others that the target PC may be running. So the way that you do this is that you analyze the algorithm's implementation and you identify the innermost loops of it and what's happening within them. And then you pass a ciphertext that we'll call C, which exploits these loops and forces the program to work predictably and in a manner that you understand and are able to decipher from the spectrogram that your equipment gets. So because our time is limited and the exact reasoning is fairly complex, the original authors took about 15 minutes to describe it and we've only got 10. We won't be able to explain in detail how you extract the key, but we're just going to breeze through it really quickly. And if you guys could ask questions, we'll be able to answer that much better in the comments, in the question section. Yeah, or we could direct you to the original presentation or paper. So this is what it looks like when it's running the algorithm, when the RSA algorithm, and basically the crux of the matter are these gaps that we see over here. So we see a gap over here, it's a sort of a small gap, and then over here we see a larger gap. And basically what it corresponds to is in the crux of this algorithm, or in the crux of the algorithm, within the innermost loop, it makes a comparison between your ciphertext C and the value of P or Q. And it compares the xth bit of C to the xth bit of P or Q. And it does an instruction if they are not equal, and if they are equal, it does nothing. So you get a very clear, audible difference between the two when this happens, and you're then able to bitwise recreate the value of P or Q using your C, and just by bitwise changing it so that until every bit is equal, and therefore the whole integer itself is equal. So what this difference sounds like is going to be on the next slide over here, and this is what it sounds like if it were in the audible range. So obviously, naturally, it's in the ultrasonic range, so we don't really hear this, but actually your PC is probably emitting these noises, and you just can't hear them, but your dog can.
Like this.
So currently, are we doomed? Currently, the state-of-the-art algorithm, RSA algorithm, uses 4096-bit keys, and researchers calculated that using this method, along with accounting for errors which required repetitions, that they were able to typically decrypt the private key in about an hour, allowing adversary your access to your internet identity. Going back to how this applies to us, I know that I've personally spent over 8 hours in the stacks quite frequently, and given how quiet it gets in there, it seems like an absolutely ideal spot for Mr. Steal Your Key to find some victims. That being said, however, it isn't quite necessary for you to live in constant fear that Big Brother is going to take your RSA key, or that the person you're meeting with coffee with is going to record your laptop. But because the authors before publicly publishing the research worked with GNU PG, which is the algorithm implementation that they themselves attacked, and they mitigated the issue by changing the implementation of the algorithm so that it was less predictable when passed such a simple ciphertext. And therefore, if you're not able to really categorize what's happening when the algorithms are going through, then you're not really able to use these acoustic leakages to great effect, because unless you know exactly what you're looking for in these leakages, it's pretty much impossible to detect, because our computers are doing so much in addition to all these things that we're trying to look at. Obviously, they didn't discuss the exact manner in which they mitigated the issue, but of course, there will more than likely be a vulnerability in the new implementation of it. And perhaps it's just a matter of time before we see that the RSA standard is being done away with because of an acoustic vulnerability of all things in perhaps a popular laptop model. These are these are the references we used. There are two YouTube videos. One's for the RSA algorithm, in case any of you have forgotten from our previous classes what that entails. There's their original paper that the authors published in 2014, I believe, and a presentation that they did at a conference, which was very helpful. And if you're looking for answers about how exactly this happens, I would direct you there. Thank you.